Wang Yang-Ming, Idealist Philosopher of 16th-Century China, by Carsun Chang. Chapter 3. The Position of Wang in Neo-Confucianism. Wang Yang-Ming rose to prominence in a period when the dualistic philosophy of Jushi was at its height. Wang's philosophy took a form which in Western terminology is known as idealistic monism. Wang Yang-Ming's philosophical system, the climax of Neo-Confucianism, is a clear, thorough, and definite attempt to explain the universe as a unity. His philosophical ideas are recorded in dialogue form in the book Chuanxi Lu. In order to arrive at an understanding of the various subjects discussed in Chuanxi Lu, it is necessary to comprehend Wang Yang-Ming's system of philosophy and to recognize Wang's position in the Neo-Confucian movement. In this endeavor, the following questions will be considered. What was Neo-Confucianism? Who was its founder? How does the philosophy of Wang Yang-Ming differ from that of the main proponents of Neo-Confucianism? What was Wang's own system? What were its later developments? Neo-Confucianism was a revival of the teachings of Confucius and refutation of the philosophy of Buddhism. In a period of turmoil and unrest, beginning with the Three Kingdoms and including the southern and northern dynasties, 220 to 588 AD, but excluding a time of unification, 265 to 317, under the dynasty of Western Xin, the Chinese intellectual class showed an inclination toward religion. Taoism and Buddhism, introduced from China, were the most popular, although Confucianism was not neglected. Most of the sutras had been translated and edited into 3,000 books which form the present Buddhist Tripitaka. Following the reunification of China under the Sui and Tang dynasties, a number of intellectuals attempted to oppose the growing influence of Buddhistic thought. Han Yu, 768 to 824, a literary man of the Tang dynasty, is credited with giving impetus to the Neo-Confucian movement with his essay Yuan Dao, an inquiry into Tao in defense of the old Chinese tradition and in refutation of Lao Tzu and Buddhism. In remonstrance to the Emperor Xianzong, Han Yu also advised against the ritual greeting of Buddhist relics. Han Yu upheld the Confucian doctrine of the fivefold human relationships against the renunciation of human relationships advocated by the Buddha and Lao Tzu. Han Yu's philosophy, in confirming the necessity for loyalty to personal relationships and the recognition of human needs, was thus more realistic than philosophical. His arguments, in comparison to the highly speculative arguments advanced by Buddhism and Taoism, were rather simple and naive, but Tao was later developed as a fundamental concept of Neo-Confucianism. Zhang Jie and Li Ao, died circa 844, two followers of Han Yu, made a thorough study of Tao. Zhang Jie advised Han Yu to devote himself to its study, and Li Ao wrote 3 essays on the return to human nature. These essays may be said to be the foundation of Neo-Confucianism. Terms such as truth, enlightenment, emptiness, calmness, the idea of becoming a sage, and the value of watchfulness in time of solitude were discussed extensively in the writings of Li Ao. Li Ao took these terms from Zhong Yong and Ta Shui, chapters of the book Li Qi. In the Sung dynasty, these terms were part and parcel of the philosophy of the Neo-Confucianists. The 2 chapters were included in the series of 4 books. Neo-Confucianism, as a revival movement, would not have begun without the stimulus of Buddhism. The introduction of Buddhism from India led Chinese scholars to an awareness that they must have their own theories, their own system of philosophy, their Weltanschauung, if they were to prevent the spread of Buddhism in China. For this purpose, they realized intellectual thought must be active, original, and able to convince the Chinese people of what is theoretically and morally right. Among the various schools of Buddhism existing in China during the period of division of the southern and northern dynasties, the school of Chanism, Zen, exerted the strongest influence. Bodhidharma founded this school and gave the following message to the Chinese. Chanism is an esoteric teaching without any basis in written texts. Its only target is the mind. The enlightenment of what is nature leads to Buddhahood. Bodhidharma taught his disciples to read the sutra, Lankavatara. Particular stress was placed on meditation, which would lead to enlightenment of the mind. According to records, for many years Bodhidharma sat before a wall to meditate. Huineng, 638 to 713, the sixth patriarch of this school, was largely responsible for the vigor of this discipline, at a time when other Buddhist schools had disappeared or were in process of gradual decline. Chan-ism is also known as the school of the mind, because it posits the mind as the determinant of all things, whether one behaves rightly or wrongly, whether a thing is good or bad, whether one affirms or denies, whether the world is considered a void or a reality. Effort is made to make the mind the master of all things. In the essay, Yangming, Mind as Master, one finds, mind is Buddha, Buddha is mind. Apart from mind, there is no Buddha. Apart from Buddha, there is no mind. Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Chan-ism, in his own sutra wrote, "The capacity of the mind is so vast that it is like the void. It has no sides. It is neither square nor round, neither great nor small, nor has it color, blue, yellow, red, or white, nor has it an upper or a lower part, nor is it long or short. There should be no liking or disliking. There should be no right nor wrong. Men of noble knowledge, your nature contains all dharmas. All dharmas are in your nature. Don't take the side of either good or bad. Don't detach yourselves from them. Don't attach yourselves to them. Then the mind is empty, and it is great." Xuanxu wrote the following stanza, "All dharmas are innate in the mind. If one seeks dharmas elsewhere, it is like a person leaving his own father and seeking him elsewhere." The school of the mind had three axioms akin to the philosophy of Mencius. 1. The mind is a focus. This is closely related to the words of Mencius. The function of the mind is to think. 2. The Chan school believed that everyone possessed the nature of Buddhahood. Mencius said that everyone can become a Yao, or a Shun, the ancient sages. 3. The belief in the goodness of human nature. This is Mencius's fundamental idea. These similarities were largely responsible for the awakening of Chinese scholars to the benefits of the new movement. Chinese scholars were only reluctantly willing to admit that they had benefited from Buddhism. Nonetheless, it was the influence of Buddhism that called forth originality and new boldness in thinking, in building the system of Neo-Confucianism and in presenting its arguments. Chan-ism was thus responsible for the emphasis on mind as the source of activity. The basis of new theories doubtlessly remained Confucianism. Liu Zhunyuan, 773 to 819, a literary man of the Tang dynasty, second only to Han Yu, pointed out the connection between the school of Chan-ism and Neo-Confucianism. He was the author of an inscription placed upon the tomb of Huineng, saying that Huineng's philosophy began and ended with the belief in the goodness of human nature. This seems to be open recognition of the relationship existing between Buddhism and the Chinese tradition, and as such worth remarking. Cheng Hao, 1032 to 1085, can be called one of the founding fathers of Neo-Confucianism for his postulation of the concept of reason during the Sung dynasty. He said, "When I found out that there is reason in every thing and event, I was so happy that I could not help swinging my hands and dancing with my feet." In this period, Confucianism was also called Li Shui, the philosophy of reason. There is a correlation between Cheng Hao's announcement of the position of reason in philosophic thought and the birth of so-called modern philosophy in the Western world, which also has as its starting point the concept of reason, or cogito. Because Chinese scholars were concerned with the establishment of standards of moral arguments, they developed the concepts of Zhen, Yi, Li, and Qi, the four standards of forms of moral law. The first three terms mean benevolence, righteousness, and decency, respectively. Qi means knowledge, with which one is able to differentiate right from wrong, one thing from another. This in relation to the objects of the physical world. The functions of Qi most nearly resemble the Western equivalent, functions of intellect or knowledge. These terms fall into two classes, Zhen, Yi, and Li as practical reason, Qi as pure reason. As Cheng Hao revealed that reason was the source of knowledge and evaluation, his brother Cheng Yi, 1033 to 1107, formulated the dictum, "Human nature is reason." It was his theory that Zhen, Yi, Li, and Qi are ideas innate in human nature. Note that he does not say they are in the mind. Cheng Yi believed that the mind, as an organ of consciousness, was only responsible for thought, whereas the four forms stem from a source much higher than thought. Mencius was the first to hold that the four forms of moral law are inborn in human nature. He wrote, When I say that all men have a mind which cannot bear to see the suffering of others, my meaning may be illustrated thus. Even nowadays, if men suddenly see a child about to fall into a well, they will without exception experience a feeling of alarm and distress. They will feel so, not as a ground on which they may seek the praise of their neighbors and friends, nor from a dislike for the reputation of having been unmoved by such a thing. From this case we may perceive that the feeling of commiseration is essential to man, that the feeling of shame and dislike is essential to man, that the feeling of modesty and complaisance is essential to man, and that the feeling of approving and disapproving is essential to man. The feeling of commiseration is the principle of benevolence. The feeling of shame and dislike is the principle of righteousness. The feeling of modesty and complaisance is the principle of propriety. The feeling of approving and disapproving is the principle of knowledge. This quotation from Mencius is the source of the formulation originated by Cheng-Zhu. He reasoned that these four forms in human nature were on a transcendental level, while mind, the organ of consciousness, was on a natural level. Mencius did not make this distinction. Somewhat later, in the period of the Southern Sung dynasty, Lu Qiuyuan, 1139 to 1193, a contemporary of Chu Shi, formulated the dictum, "Mind is reason," which was opposed by Chu Shi. He accused Lu of having allowed himself to be corrupted by the doctrines of Buddhism, or Chanism. In Lu's time, Chanism was extremely powerful, so possibly it did have some influence on the thinking of Lu. It is also true to say that Lu's formulation was based on a text by Mencius, made more vivid to Lu through his study of Chanism. Of more interest to us, however, is the fact that Wang Yang-Ming later adopted this formula and made it the fundamental concept of his own philosophy. Wang was not satisfied to accept the principle, mind is reason, without going a step further in an attempt to solve the problem of whether mind and things are separate or identical, before he felt certain that things can be known when they are conscious in the mind. He concluded that things and mind are identical. Mind and reason, which is hidden in everything, can be identified. From this he inferred other theories: unity of knowing and doing, realization of the Liang Jie. How closely Wang is related to the Lu school can be seen from Wang's preface to the collected works of Lu. See appendix for the complete version. The science of sagehood is the science of mind. What was transmitted from Yao and Shun to Yu lay in the words, "The mind of man is full of danger. The mind of Tao is subtle. Be proficient and unitive. Hold the mean firmly." This was the source of the science of mind. What was called the mean was the mind of Tao. When the mind of Tao exists, in its proficiency and unity, it is Zhen, which is also the mean. The work of Confucius and Mencius was to devote the self to Zhen, which in turn was derived from the transmitted message about proficiency and unity. In later ages there grew up the belief that the objects of one's seeking should be on the outside, rather than the inside. Therefore, even a disciple of Confucius, Tzu Kung, thought that the work of his master consisted of wide reading and memorizing, and that Zhen became a matter of giving more alms to more people. Tzu Kung's mistake was corrected by Confucius in his remark that what he sought was a pervading unity, and that the exercise of Zhen should begin with one's self. The meaning of this remark was simply that endeavor should begin with one's own mind. Many people disliked Lu Qiuyuan because of his difference of opinion with Chu Shi. The former philosopher was condemned as a follower of Chan, as a Buddhist who disregarded human relationships and the principles of the phenomenal world, and whose attitude towards life, therefore, was negative. If the doctrine of Lu Qiuyuan had really been negative, then it would have been justly condemned as of the Chan school. But the works of the Chan school and of Lu Qiuyuan are still in existence, and it is easy to compare the one with the other. Similarity and difference between them may be readily seen by anyone who looks, without having to spend much effort in research. Here Wang defended Lu by saying that Lu's philosophy was based on the tradition of the ancient sages, especially Mencius, and had nothing in common with the school of Chan. For this reason, Wang and Lu are often classified as belonging to the same school. Some major distinctions between the Cheng-Zhu school and the Lu-Wang school should be mentioned for a better understanding of Wang's system. The polemic between the Cheng-Zhu school and the Lu-Wang school resembles that between the empiricist and rationalist schools of the West. However, the theory of sensations did not rise in China. It appeared in another form. Whether the mind is sufficient to itself or must learn from sources outside itself is the point in dispute. Wang believed that intelligibility was the core of the universe, with man's mind or intuitive knowledge at its center. He said, "Mind means nothing but intelligence. What fills the whole world is intelligibility. As man is made of a physical body and a spirit, he is intercepted and isolated as a unit from the whole. Intelligence is the master of the universe and of spirits. Without intelligence, how can the height of the heavens be surveyed? Without intelligence, how can the profundity of the earth be studied? Without intelligence, how can fortune and misfortune be revealed by spirits? If heaven, earth, spirits, and the manifold things were separated from intelligence, all of them would lose their existence. If my intelligence were separated from the universe, spirits, and the manifold things, it would lose its existence too. That is why I say that they, my intelligence, spirits, and the manifold things, together constitute an integration from which none can be divorced. Thus it is clear, Wang holds that reality consists of consciousness. His way of reducing the universe to a unity can be seen in the following sentence. Reason is the order of qi. Qi is that with which mind operates. Chu Shi, on the other hand, is a dualist. For him the world is divided into two, the internal, which is to know, and the external, the manifold things. His supplementary chapter to the Great Learning includes the following passage. The meaning of the expression, the perfecting of knowledge, depends on the investigation of things, is this. If we wish to carry our knowledge to the utmost, we must investigate the principles of all things we come into contact with. For the intelligent mind of man is certainly formed to know, and there is not a single thing in which its principles do not inhere. So long as all principles are not investigated, man's knowledge is incomplete. From the statement, we must investigate the principles of all things, can be drawn the inference that Chu Shi sees a multiplicity of things in the natural world, which may be divided into men, animals, plants, minerals, and so forth. Chu Shi found it impossible to reduce the whole world to a monistic unity. Like his predecessor, Cheng-Zhu, he advanced the theory that there are two primordial things in this world, Li, reason, an immaterial cosmic principle, and Qi, ether, or matter, which denotes material objects. All things have a bodily form which is the condensation of Qi. Like any other objects, man is composed of both Li, reason, and Qi. Li, reason, is inherent in all men and all things, but it is Qi in its varying proportions that makes men and things differ from one another. As there are many things in the world, their principles must be studied one by one. This is investigation of things. According to Chu Shi, mind and matter, mind and reason, the cultivation of mind and the investigation of things fall into two distinct fields. For this reason, Chu Shi's philosophy is considered dualistic. In pedagogy, Chu Shi advocated that such elementary principles as service to parents and brothers should be taught first. If the premise, mind is reason, were given as the first lesson, students would find its speculative nature too difficult to grasp, and thus might give up studying altogether. The simpler principles should be taught before the more profound are offered for consideration. Chu Shi also said that mind consists of two parts, mind of Tao and mind of man. In order to cultivate the mind of Tao, desires of the senses should be kept from the mind of man. In both metaphysics and pedagogy, Chu Shi exhibits his dualistic tendency. The controversy between the Cheng-Zhu school and the Lu-Wang school began in the Sung dynasty and continued into the Qing dynasty. Each school quotes from Confucius, Mencius, and the five classics in its own defense, while refuting the beliefs of the other. Indeed, to this philosophical problem, no verdict has been given, as in the case of the controversy between rationalism and empiricism. Wang's school was most powerful during the Ming dynasty. His followers were found in many provinces of China. According to the Mingshu Shui An, the philosophical records of the Ming scholars, 8 separate groups of the school existed: the Zheqiang, the Qiangxi, the Jiangsu and Anhui, the Hupei and Hunan, the North China, the Guangdong and Fujian, the Li Cai, who rebelled, and the Taichou. Among these groups, the Zheqiang, the Qiangxi, and the Taichou were the most active. Following a brief survey of the characteristics of these 3 groups of the Wang school, we shall give a summary of the development of Wang's theory and the testimony of Tao on the Heavenly Fountain Bridge, since these factors brought about the split in the Wang school following his death. Qian Tehung has said that Wang Yang-Ming's philosophical teachings can be seen to fall into 3 stages. First, during his exile in Longchang, he announced the principle that mind is reason and stressed the unity of knowing and doing. Second, during his stay in Shuqiao, he declared the efficacy of meditation and recommended meditation to his students. Third, in the year 1516, he simplified his ways of teaching and wrote the formula, realization of Liangqi is intuitive knowledge. For Wang, Liangqi was the only reality, the thing that mattered. Liangqi often seems to be a sudden enlightenment. It is that quality which enables one, whether the mind is occupied or not, to distinguish between light and darkness, right and wrong. By keeping a careful watch on one's mind, one will attain the right path. This is the investigation of things on which Wang lays so much stress in his philosophy. Each of the branches of the Lu-Wang school interpreted Liangqi in its own way. An essay written by Wang Qi shows how many and varied these interpretations were. Some said Liang Qi should remain in calmness and should not be busy about show. Others said there is no ready-made Liang Qi. Liang Qi needs cultivation just as gold ore needs melting, purifying, and beating. Some said Liang Qi is attained only by practice. It cannot be found otherwise. Some said Liang Qi has its essence and its operation. Inevitably, these contradictory interpretations caused confusion in the minds of scholars, and a split in the school ensued. A conversation between two members of the Chekiang school, Qian Tehung and Wang Qi, is further proof of the varying interpretations of Wang's theory. A discussion of the testimony of Tao on the Heavenly Fountain Bridge includes pronouncement of the four beings. 1. The reality of mind, or mind per se, is beyond good and evil. 2. What is stirred up in the will may be either good or evil. 3. To know what is good or evil is the function of Liang Qi. 4. To do what is good and to eliminate what is evil is the work of the investigation of things. These four statements are known as the four beings because they presuppose the existence of good and evil. However, in Wang Qi's opinion, they do not represent the ultimate truth. Wang Qi, in conversation with Qian Tehung, said, "If mind per se is beyond good and evil, then will is also beyond good and evil, so is knowledge, and so are all things. As long as you assert that there is good and evil in the will, there must be good and evil in the mind too." Wang Qi's formula was known as the four nothingnesses, because the four entities, mind, will, knowledge, and things, were conceived as beyond good and evil. Wang Qi disagreed with Qian Tehung in the last three premises. The two disciples brought their discussion before Wang and asked his verdict about ultimate truth. Wang Yang-Ming answered that there were two approaches to ultimate truth. The four nothingnesses were for the talented, while the four beings were for the average person. At the end of their conversation, Wang Yang-Ming repeated the four beings, saying that mind, will, knowledge, and things must be examined in the light of good and evil. Those who formed the Qiangxi school emphasized the need for vigilance of the mind and a mood of calm. Huang Zongxi, author of Ming Shu Shui An, argued that since Wang Yang-Ming spent much of his time in Qiangxi, his pupils there had a more profound understanding of his philosophy than did those who belonged to other schools. The Taichou school, led by Wang Ken, was allied with Wang Qi in an approach which claimed a direct joy and a sudden enlightenment of Tao. This school had its own formula called Investigation of Things of Huainan, the latter a part of Qiangsu. The members of the Taichou school were ostensibly converted by Wang Yang-Ming to the theory of realization of Liang Qi, although they did not, as a result, abandon their own theories. Of the leaders of the three schools, Wang Qi was longest lived. He died at the age of 85. An advocate of the four nothingnesses in his conversation and writings, he exerted a profound influence in academic circles. But his opponents spoke of his theories as mad Chanism because Wang Qi's metaphysic of the reality of mind, or mind per se, had no reliable data to support it. His speculations, like those of Wang Ken, that mind should be natural and under no control, were held responsible for the corruption of the Wang school. At the end of the Ming dynasty, the Tungling school was begun with the object of attacking the Wang school. It laid stress on the control of the mind and the acquisition of more and more knowledge. Ku Yanwu challenged the Wang school and described Wang's philosophy as empty talk. The Times demanded a positive way of study. The decline of Wang Yang-Ming's school began because there were two rivals to his teachings. First, the Han scholarship, a philological study of the classics based upon criticism of the original texts. More specifically, the Han scholars endeavored to find a correct explanation for each word, each term, and each object. Second, a return to the doctrines of Chu Shi, whose philosophy was dualistic. Thus, during the Qing dynasty, and with the exception of a few scholars who attempted to reinterpret Wang's philosophy, Wang Yang-Ming's teachings were nearly forgotten. However, Wang's philosophy had been received with more respect in Japan. Some participants in the Meiji Reform were students of the Wang school. The practicality and effectiveness of Wang's thought in Japan induced the Chinese to re-evaluate the philosophy of Wang Yang-Ming. It seems now that a revival of Wang's philosophy in the Far East is certain to occur.